The judge read the note and her face froze. Without a word, she pressed a button under her desk, and the courthouse doors locked with a loud clang. The morning started like any other. I was sitting in the gallery, watching my friend Marcus nervously shuffle his feet at the defense table. Marcus is just 14, a skinny black boy who loves basketball and sneaking Skittles into his hoodie pocket when his mom isn't looking. But today, he wasn't a kid with big dreams. He was a defendant. They said Marcus broke into an old man's house with his older cousin and stole some tools. The prosecutor painted him as a delinquent, but those who knew Marcus knew the truth. He was scared, trapped by peer pressure, and trying to fit in with someone he looked up to. His public defender was nice enough, but didn't seem very hopeful. She'd said something about getting him probation, if they could prove he was just caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus's mom sat near me, clutching a crumpled tissue. She hadn't stopped crying since the arrest. She worked 2 jobs and did her best, but she couldn't always keep up with what Marcus was doing when he wasn't home. I didn't think things could feel heavier in that courtroom until the note. It happened during a break. Marcus had whispered something to his lawyer, and she'd nodded. The bailiff walked him up to the judge's bench, where he handed her a small folded piece of paper. No one knew what it said, but as soon as the judge read it, her face changed. Her lips tightened, and her eyes scanned the room as if she suddenly saw something none of us did. Then, without explaining herself, she hit a button under her desk, locking the courthouse doors. The bailiff shifted nervously. The prosecutor frowned. The defense attorney whispered, "What's going on?" The judge stood, smoothing her robe as she addressed the room. "This court is now in recess," she said in a sharp voice. "Everyone, remain seated. Officers, I need you to secure Marcus Allen immediately." Marcus froze. "What did I do?" he stammered. "Son," the judge said, her voice softening for a moment, "you're not in trouble. But I need to make sure you're safe." "Safe? From what?" The minutes crawled by, but eventually, the judge came back with more officers. They led Marcus into her chambers, leaving the rest of us in a stunned silence. Whispers filled the air, everyone speculating what could be happening. His mom was losing it. "What's going on? Where's my baby?" she cried. I didn't have any answers for her. None of us did. An hour later, the doors unlocked, and the judge returned to the bench. Her face was calm but tired, like someone who'd just seen the worst of humanity and couldn't unsee it. She called Marcus's mom to the stand. "Ma'am," she said gently, "we've arranged for Marcus to be moved to a safe location for the time being. You can visit him, but we need to ensure he's out of harm's way." "Harm's way? From who?" The judge hesitated but then said, "The note your son handed me contained a plea for help. He said that his cousin, the one he's accused of breaking into that house with, has been threatening him to take all the blame. And he mentioned your neighbor, Mr. Coleman." Everyone in the room stiffened. Mr. Coleman was a retired police officer who lived a few doors down from Marcus's family. He'd always seemed friendly enough, but he had a reputation for being strict. Marcus's note alleged that Coleman had been making threats, saying if Marcus didn't take the fall, he'd make sure the boy paid for it. It didn't say how, but the implication was enough to chill the air in that courtroom. Over the next few days, the story unraveled like a nightmare. Turns out Marcus's cousin had been working with Coleman, stealing tools to sell. When they got caught, Coleman had threatened to hurt Marcus if he didn't keep quiet about his involvement. The judge acted fast. She made sure Marcus was placed in protective custody, and she opened an investigation into Coleman. Eventually, it came out that Coleman had a long history of using his position to intimidate black kids in the neighborhood, though no one had ever been brave enough to report him. Marcus's note changed that. It was a simple, desperate message. "Please help me. He said he'll hurt my mom if I talk. I'm scared." Months later, Coleman was arrested, and Marcus's cousin took a plea deal, admitting the truth. Marcus's charges were dropped. I saw Marcus again a year later. He looked taller, healthier. His mom said he was back in school and playing basketball again. When I asked him how he felt, he just shrugged. "It's better now," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "The judge believed me. That's all that mattered." And he was right. Sometimes, all it takes is one person listening to change everything. Marcus's life didn't magically become perfect after that day, but there was a noticeable shift. For the first time, he felt like someone in authority had seen him for who he really was, a scared kid in need of help, not a criminal. The judge stayed involved for a while after the case. She arranged for Marcus to have a mentor, Mr. Thompson, a retired teacher who ran a program for kids on probation. Even though Marcus no longer had a record, the judge thought he could benefit from the structure. Mr. Thompson wasn't just a guide for Marcus. He became a safe space where Marcus could talk about his fears and dreams. The first time they met, Marcus was guarded. He barely spoke and kept his hood pulled low over his face. But Mr. Thompson didn't push. "You don't have to talk, kid," he said. "We can just shoot hoops if you want." And that's exactly what they did. Week after week, Marcus started to open up. He told Mr. Thompson about how he used to dream of playing for the NBA but stopped believing in it after his dad left. He talked about the times he felt like nothing he did would ever be good enough, how he hated himself for following his cousin that day, and how terrified he was of Mr. Coleman. Mr. Thompson listened without judgment. "You made a mistake, Marcus," he said one afternoon, "but that mistake doesn't define you. You get to decide who you are now, no one else." Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to change too. Mr. Coleman's arrest shook everyone. For years, families had whispered about his unfair treatment of black kids, but no one had felt safe enough to challenge him. Seeing Marcus's bravery inspired others to step forward. A group of parents, led by Marcus's mom, started working together to protect their kids. They held community meetings, organized watch groups, and even petitioned the local government for better youth programs. It wasn't just about Coleman anymore. It was about making sure no kid in their neighborhood felt trapped or voiceless again. One day, Marcus and his mom were invited back to the courthouse. The judge wanted to check in and see how he was doing. When he walked into her chambers, she smiled warmly. "You look taller," she said. Marcus grinned. "I've been practicing my jump shot." The judge chuckled, then turned serious. "I wanted to thank you, Marcus. That note you gave Meat was brave. You helped uncover something that might have stayed hidden for a long time." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I was scared," he admitted. "That's what makes it even braver," she said. "Doing the right thing, even when you're scared, is what real courage looks like." As Marcus walked out of the courthouse that day, he felt a sense of pride he'd never known before. He wasn't just the boy who handed the judge a note. He was someone who mattered, someone who had made a difference. Years passed, and Marcus grew into a young man. He stayed out of trouble, worked hard in school, and eventually earned a scholarship to a nearby college. His first year there, he joined a program that mentored at-risk kids in the city, wanting to give back in the same way people like Mr. Thompson had helped him. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting with a young boy named Elijah, who reminded him of himself at that age, quiet, unsure of his worth. "I messed up bad," Elijah said, staring at his hands. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I've been there." "You?" "But you're in college," Elijah said, eyes wide. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you a story about a note I once wrote to a judge." And so he did. Elijah listened intently, his small, nervous hands fiddling with a loose thread on his sweatshirt. As Marcus shared his story, the boy's eyes flickered with something hope. "So, what happened to you after you wrote the note?" Elijah asked when Marcus finished. "I realized something important," Marcus said. "I could either let people decide my story for me or take control of it myself. It wasn't easy. I had to work hard to prove to myself that I was better than my mistakes, but I had people who believed in me. People like the judge, my mom, and Mr. Thompson." Elijah stayed quiet for a moment, his brows furrowed. "Do you think someone like me can do that? Change, I mean?" Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked him in the eye. "I don't just think you can, Elijah. I know you can. But it's going to take work, and you're going to have to start by believing it yourself. Nobody's perfect, but every day you have a chance to do better." Elijah nodded slowly. "I want to. I just don't know how." "Then let me help you," Marcus said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We'll figure it out together." For Marcus, mentoring kids like Elijah became more than a side project. It became a passion. Over the next few years, he built connections with schools, churches, and community centers, growing the mentorship program into something much bigger. Word began to spread about Marcus Allen, the kid who had once handed a judge a note that locked a courthouse, but who now unlocked opportunities for others. His story resonated because it wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption and rising above fear. One day, years later, Marcus got an invitation in the mail. It was from the judge. She was retiring and wanted him to attend her farewell ceremony. The courthouse felt smaller than he remembered when he walked in, though maybe he had just grown into himself over the years. He spotted the judge at the front of the room, her once dark hair now speckled with gray. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up. "Marcus," she exclaimed, pulling him into a warm hug. "I'm so glad you could make it." "How could I not?" he replied with a grin. As the ceremony began, the judge gave a speech about her career. Near the end, she paused, looking out at the audience thoughtfully. "I've presided over thousands of cases in my time," she began, "but there's one I'll never forget, a young boy who, despite his fear, had the courage to hand me a note that revealed truths others were too afraid to share. That moment reminded me of why I do this work, to protect the vulnerable and ensure that every voice is heard, no matter how small or scared it may feel." She glanced briefly at Marcus, her eyes twinkling, and he felt a wave of gratitude swell in his chest. After the ceremony, as Marcus was leaving, a young law clerk approached him. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Allen?" she asked, her tone nervous but excited. "Yeah, that's me. I just wanted to say that your story really inspired me," she said, her cheeks turning red. "I read about your case when I was in law school. It's part of what made me want to pursue a career in juvenile justice." Marcus smiled, humbled by the thought. "Thanks, I just did what I had to do." "Maybe," she replied, "but it changed everything for a lot of people, including me." That night, as Marcus walked home, he thought about how far he'd come from a scared 14-year-old boy in a courtroom to a man making a difference in the world. And while his journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth every step. He smiled to himself, thinking about Elijah and the other kids he mentored, and how their stories were just beginning. Maybe, just maybe, his story was only the beginning too. Over the next several months, Marcus started receiving invitations to speak at more event schools, community centers, even a youth justice summit in the city. Each time, he would begin by telling his story, raw and unpolished, exactly as it had happened. He didn't try to be dramatic or paint himself as a hero. He just told the truth, about fear, about making mistakes, and about what happens when someone finally listens. What Marcus didn't expect, however, was how far-reaching his story would become. One afternoon, Marcus got a call from a reporter at a national news outlet. She had heard about his mentorship program and wanted to write a feature on his journey. Marcus hesitated. He'd never cared much about attention, and the thought of having his story told to millions made him uneasy. "What's the point of this?" he asked. The reporter's voice softened. "Marcus, there are kids out there like you once were. Maybe they've made mistakes. Maybe they're scared, and no one's listening to them. Your story could remind them that they're not alone and that they can change their lives." That struck a chord with Marcus. After a long pause, he said, "Okay, but only if we focus on the kids. This isn't just about me." The article came out a month later. It was called "The Boy Who Wrote the Note That Changed Everything." It detailed Marcus's journey, but also highlighted the work he was doing for the next generation. The story went viral, sparking a national conversation about the justice system, the power of second chances, and the importance of mentorship. With the newfound attention came more opportunities and challenges. One evening, while Marcus was organizing a basketball tournament for his mentorship program, he got a call from Elijah's mom. "Marcus, can you come over?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Elijah's talking about running away." Marcus's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When he arrived, Elijah was sitting on the front steps, his knees pulled to his chest. "What's going on, man?" Marcus asked, sitting down beside him. Elijah shrugged, his face sullen. "I messed up again. Got into a fight at school. Mom's mad. Teachers are mad. Everyone's mad. Feels like no one wants me around." Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm not going to lie to you, Elijah. I've been where you are, and it's easy to think running away will fix everything. But it doesn't. It just makes things harder. I just feel stuck," Elijah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded. "I know that feeling. But let me ask you something. When you feel stuck on the court, what do you do?" Elijah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" You find another way, right? You pivot, you pass, you do whatever it takes to keep the play alive. Life's like that too. Sometimes, you've got to find another way. Elijah glanced at Marcus, doubt flickering in his eyes. And if you can't find a way on your own, Marcus added, you've got people like me to help you figure it out. After a long silence, Elijah finally said, "Okay, I'll stay." Incidents like that reminded Marcus of why he kept pushing forward, even when things got overwhelming. For every national spotlight or flattering news article, there were dozens of moments like that night with Elijah, moments that wouldn't make headlines but meant everything to the people involved. Years later, Marcus found himself standing at another ceremony, but this time, it wasn't for someone else. The mayor of the city was presenting him with an award for his contributions to youth development. The audience was filled with familiar faces. Elijah, now a confident young man studying to become a social worker. Marcus's mom, proud, tears shining in her eyes. Mr. Thompson, grinning like a proud father. As Marcus accepted the plaque, he thought back to that 14-year-old boy, terrified and trembling as he handed the judge that note. If someone had told me back then that I'd be standing here today, I wouldn't have believed them, Marcus said, his voice steady but emotional. But what I've learned is that one monotone choice can change your life, and sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you to remind you that you matter. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus didn't let it go to his head. Instead, he locked eyes with Elijah and the other kids from his program. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. As the applause faded, Marcus stepped down from the podium, shaking hands and exchanging hugs, already thinking about what came next. There was still so much work to do, and Marcus knew that if his story could change one life, maybe it could change many more. As the award ceremony wound down and the room started to empty, Marcus stood by the doors, thanking people as they left. Elijah lingered behind, holding his own small plaque-an award Marcus had insisted on giving to him earlier for his commitment to mentoring younger kids in the program. "Still doesn't feel real," Elijah said, holding the plaque up to admire it. "Nobody ever thought I'd be the kid getting awards." Marcus chuckled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's because nobody knew what you were capable of yet, not even you. But look at you now, Elijah, you're proving everyone, even yourself, wrong." Elijah grinned sheepishly. "You're the one who believed in me first. And now it's your job to pass that belief on," Marcus replied. "It's like a chain. You keep pulling the next person up, and they pull someone else." Elijah nodded, but his smile faded. "Think it'll ever stop, though? The way kids like us keep needing to fight just to be seen?" Marcus looked out across the room where parents and kids were hugging, laughing, and sharing stories. It was a moment of warmth and hope, but he knew Elijah's question carried weight. "Maybe not completely," Marcus admitted. "There's always going to be challenges, people who don't see us, don't care, or think we don't belong. But that's why we have to keep showing up. For each other. For the next kid who feels invisible." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, clutching his plaque a little tighter. That night, as Marcus drove home, he thought about what Elijah had said. The truth was, the system wasn't perfect, it was far from it. Too many kids were still falling through the cracks, punished for mistakes that wealthier or more privileged kids would be given a pass for. He knew he couldn't fix everything, but he also knew he didn't have to. The spark he lit in his community was already growing into a flame. Parents were organizing, schools were getting involved, and kids like Elijah were stepping up as leaders. Still, Marcus wanted to do more. He spent the next few weeks reaching out to lawyers, educators, and activists, trying to figure out what his next move should be. Then one day, an idea hit him. What if he started a foundation? Something bigger than just his mentorship program. Something that could fund scholarships, legal aid, and advocacy work for kids who needed it. The idea felt daunting. He wasn't rich or famous, and he wasn't sure where to start. But as always, Marcus leaned on the people who believed in him. The judge agreed to help him navigate the nonprofit world, and Mr. Thompson introduced him to a grant writer who volunteered to draft proposals. Within a year, the Note Foundation was born, named after the piece of paper that had changed Marcus's life all those years ago. The foundation grew quickly. It started with local scholarships for at-risk kids and workshops, teaching young people how to advocate for themselves. But soon, it expanded to offer legal support for juvenile cases, mental health counseling, and even partnerships with schools to improve equity in discipline policies. Elijah became one of the first youth ambassadors for the foundation. Standing in front of classrooms and community groups, he shared his own story and encouraged other kids to speak up about what they needed. One day, after a particularly powerful presentation, Elijah pulled Marcus aside. "You know," he said, his voice filled with awe, "all of this, everything we're doing, it's because you wrote that note. You realize that, right?" Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "It's not just about the note, Elijah. It's about what happened after. It's about everyone who took that moment and turned it into something bigger." The note was just the spark. Years passed, and the impact of the Note Foundation spread far beyond Marcus's city. By the time Marcus turned 30, the foundation had helped over 1,000 kids, with countless success stories echoing his own. On the anniversary of the foundation's creation, Marcus returned to the courthouse where it all started. The building felt the same, but everything else had changed, especially him. Standing in the empty gallery, he pictured his 14-year-old self trembling in front of the judge. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the weight of that moment still lingered. He pulled a small, weathered piece of paper from his pocket, the original note he'd written all those years ago, which the judge had returned to him once the case was closed. The words were smudged, the handwriting shaky, but the message was clear. "Please help me. I don't know what else to do." Marcus smiled softly. "We found a way," he whispered, folding the note and placing it back in his pocket. And with that, he walked out of the courthouse, ready to keep building the future he once thought was impossible. As Marcus left the courthouse, the cool evening air brushed against his face, carrying with it a strange mix of nostalgia and hope. The streets outside were quieter now than he remembered, but they felt alive in a way they hadn't when he was a scared teenager filled with possibility instead of fear. He pulled out his phone as it buzzed with a call. It was Elijah. "Hey Elijah, what's up?" Marcus answered. "Marcus, I just got out of the meeting with the foundation board. They approved my idea." Elijah's excitement was contagious. "Wait, which idea?" Marcus asked, though he had a feeling. "The mobile outreach program," Elijah said, practically shouting through the phone. "We're going to have a van with resources, counselors, legal advice, tutoring, everything. We're taking it straight to the neighborhoods where kids need it most." Marcus broke into a grin, stopping mid-step on the sidewalk. "That's amazing, Elijah. I knew they couldn't say no to that. You've got a real talent for this, you know?" Elijah laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, I had a good mentor. Just keep paying it forward," Marcus said. "That's the only thing I ask." "Always," Elijah promised. The mobile outreach program became one of the most ambitious projects the Note Foundation had ever launched. Elijah poured his heart into it, and when the first van rolled out into the community, Marcus was there to celebrate, standing proudly by his protégé's side. The van wasn't just a symbol of help, it was a beacon of hope. Kids would come up timidly at first, unsure if they could trust the people inside. But once they saw familiar faces, Elijah, Marcus, and other mentors, they started to open up. Some came for tutoring, others for a warm meal and a kind word. And some, like Marcus years ago, came because they were desperate for someone to listen. One day, as Marcus was sitting in the van, a boy around 12 years old shuffled in, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes darted nervously around the small space. "Hey there," Marcus said gently. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated before mumbling. "Jaden." "That's a strong name," Marcus said, smiling. "What can we do for you, Jaden?" Jaden looked down at the paper in his hand, then slowly passed it to Marcus. It was a note, scrawled in messy handwriting. "I'm scared. Please help me." Marcus felt his heart clench as he read the words. They were so familiar, so painfully close to the note he had written years ago. He knelt down so he was eye level with Jaden. "You don't have to be scared anymore," Marcus said. "You did the hardest part already, asking for help. We're here for you now." Jaden looked up, his wide eyes filled with both fear and a glimmer of hope. That moment reminded Marcus why he had started all of this in the first place. For kids like Jaden, for kids like him. Over the years, Marcus watched as the foundation grew beyond anything he had imagined. More mentors joined the cause, more kids found their footing, and more neighborhoods began to thrive. Elijah eventually took on a leadership role, running the day-to-day operations of the foundation, while Marcus focused on expanding its reach nationwide. But Marcus never lost touch with the kids. He still showed up at events, still shot hoops with the new recruits, still read every handwritten note that came his way. One day, as Marcus walked through the Foundation's headquarters, a bustling space filled with laughter, determination, and purpose, he stopped to admire a wall covered with framed notes from kids who had been helped over the years. At the very center of the display was his own note, the words still smudged but as powerful as ever. "Please help me. I don't know what else to do." Marcus smiled, his heart full. It wasn't just a note anymore. It was a movement, a reminder that even the smallest cry for help could ignite a change that rippled outwards, touching lives in ways he'd never imagined. And as long as there were kids like Jaden who needed someone to listen, Marcus knew his work would never be done. Years passed, and Marcus's life became a tapestry woven with success stories, heart-wrenching moments, and countless breakthroughs. The Note Foundation didn't just grow, it became a beacon of hope that stretched far beyond their city. Chapters opened in other states, each carrying the same mission: to listen, to believe, and to act. Elijah continued to thrive in his leadership role, proving that the cycle of mentorship and empowerment was as strong as Marcus had always hoped. Under Elijah's guidance, the mobile outreach program expanded to a fleet of vans, each one outfitted to meet the unique needs of the communities they served. One day, Marcus was sitting at his desk when he got a call from an unfamiliar number. When he answered, a woman's voice hesitated on the other end. "Hi, is this Marcus Allen?" she asked, her tone tentative. "This is him," Marcus replied. "Who's calling?" "This might sound strange," the woman began, "but my son was one of the kids helped by your foundation. His name is Jaden. You probably don't remember him, but he's talked about you ever since he walked into that van a few years ago." Marcus smiled, the memory of the shy boy passing him the note rushing back. "Of course I remember Jaden. How's he doing?" The woman's voice cracked slightly as she continued. "He's doing amazing. For the first time in years, he smiles. He plays on the school's basketball team and just got accepted into a college H-Prep program. He said you made him believe he was worth saving." Marcus swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion. "Jaden did all the work. I just reminded him that he had it in him all along. He wanted me to call you," she said. "He's too nervous to say it himself, but thank you. You saved his life." The call stayed with Marcus for days. It was a reminder that the ripple effect of that one note, the one he had written as a desperate boy, was still spreading. Not long after, Marcus received an email from Jaden himself. It was short, but heartfelt. "Mr. Marcus, I just wanted you to know I'm doing good now. Thank you for reading my note when no one else cared. I hope one day I can help kids the way you helped me." "Jaden," Marcus replied immediately, inviting Jaden to come volunteer with the foundation when he was ready. He could already see Jaden's future unfolding, a new link in the chain, continuing the cycle of hope and redemption. Years later, the Note Foundation hosted a celebration for its 20th anniversary. The event was a massive gathering, filled with mentors, kids, families, and supporters who had all been touched by its work. Marcus stood on stage, now in his 40s but still the same at heart. A boy who had once needed help and found the courage to ask for it. "I was 14 years old when I wrote a note that changed my life," he began, looking out at the crowd. "At the time, I didn't know if anyone would read it, let alone care. But someone did. Someone cared enough to listen. That moment taught me the power of speaking up and the even greater power of being heard." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This foundation wasn't built on my story alone. It was built on thousands of stories of kids finding their voice, mentors stepping up, and communities coming together. And it proves something I've believed since that day in court. Change starts with one act of courage, and it grows when we pass that courage on." The audience erupted into applause, but Marcus's gaze lingered on the faces of the kids sitting in the front row, some shy, some excited, all full of potential. They were the reason he kept going. As the event wrapped up, Marcus wandered over to the mentorship booth, where Elijah was explaining the program to a group of parents. Nearby, Jaden, now in his 20s, and a mentor himself, was handing out flyers. Jaden saw Marcus and walked over, his grin wide and confident. "Hey, Mr. Marcus, did you see? I brought 3 kids into the program today. I think they're gonna love it." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "You're doing amazing, Jaden. I'm proud of you." Jaden looked down for a moment, his voice softer when he spoke again. Hey there! If this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe to join me for more powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together, we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard, so let's grow this community of changemakers. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together.